Do you ever wonder how great leaders in the community make things happen? When they encounter new, unexpected challenges like a pandemic, how do they continue to successfully make an impact? Welcome to That Sounds Terrific, the podcast that connects you with these amazing people. Get insights on what they do to meet their goals, find out how you can help them in their mission, and learn their methods so you can be more successful at what you do. Welcome to That Sounds Terrific with host Nick Koziol.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Joining me today is Ariana Blossom, and she helps sustainability leaders and teams strategize, all sorts of wonderful things she does. And I'm so excited to have her on our show as the founder and CEO of Uncommon Accord. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick. I'm excited to be here.
Well, like I said, I'm excited to have you here. We kind of had this chance encounter meeting during a conference and got to talking, and I'm like, I gotta have her on the show. So why don't you just start off by telling our audience a little bit about yourself and about your company and kind of how you got started, and what you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite a journey. I started the company 14 years ago when I decided to become a life coach, and it really happened because my dad died in 2008, and it was the hottest mess I have ever been in my life. And I went to actually see a life coach on the recommendation of a family member, and I found it really helpful. And then as life happens, I kind of just sort of kept spinning in my orbit and had no direction, and then I had two contracts for work that just ended. There wasn't any chance of them being repeated. And I was like, I really don't know what to do with myself. And it's one of those moments. A friend of mine had sent me an email with a link to coaching, and he said, I think you would be great at this. And that was it. That's all he wrote. But it was like, for me, it was like the lightning bolt that just like ran through my body. And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I've been a coach ever since. And I started with life coaching because that's all I knew at the time. And then it just kept morphing. I got a client who came to my office one day and he said, look, my boss said that if I don't get coached, I'm going to get fired. So
Mhm.
here I am. And then so I coached him for about 6 weeks, and he said, hey, can you come work with my team? And that was the first time I had really directly worked in an organization as a coach. And it's just kind of spawned all kinds of really cool projects that I've been able to do with companies.
That's awesome. And sorry, honestly, to hear about your dad. That's a rough moment in anyone's life, having to deal with the death of a parent. But you know, it led to where you are today, and I think it's really interesting that you became a coach kind of as a result of some of these things. So, um, and coaches need coaches, right? So it's so interesting that sometimes like you get coached, then all of a sudden you become, that mentor for somebody else, whether it's officially or just helping somebody out. But so every coach has their niche area. Every coach kind of focuses on different populations. Can you tell us a little bit about like where your focus is, and your sort of the ideal client, or the client that really gets drawn to you?
Yeah. So actually, I'm onboarding a new client right now, and they're a small team. They're a nonprofit, and they are in sustainability. And it's the kinds of challenges where they really need to connect as a team, and they want to do team building. They don't know how to do it themselves. They don't know how to facilitate those conversations, right? And it's this idea that when a system is broken, the fastest way to repair it is to get the parts to connect.
Hmm.
And it's often a thing that's missing in organizations. Is the approach is, well, if we could just get more done, and I'm just going to tell you what to do, right? We're still in this sort of hierarchical model of, I'm just going to tell you what to do, you go do it and get it done. Sure, in some
Hmm.
cases that works, but there are a lot of ways that misses the opportunity to really strengthen the bonds inside the organization that creates that loyalty that companies are dying for, like attraction and retention.
Hmm.
And and benefits can be a big part of that to initially get people in the door. But once they're in the door, they need to connect with other people.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know
Communication, two-way communication is really important from the top down. I totally agree with that. And when you don't effectively communicate decisions, like if you do like what you're saying, like you just say, I want you to do this. That does work sometimes, but then the meaning behind those decisions and mentoring your employees as to why that decision happened, even telling them that it was their idea, is sometimes very hard for like a leader to do, in saying, we're doing this because you guys came up with this idea and of how to process how to do it. Sometimes there's that like weird negativity where like, oh, that was my idea and I got no credit for it. Or other times it's like they didn't even realize it was their idea and that it sparked that thing. So two-way communication is so important, and it kind of sounds like that's a lot of what you're trying to do through your work.
Yeah, to your point, leaders often get this idea, especially young leaders, is the idea that you're supposed to show up and be complete. You're
Mhm.
supposed to have all the answers. And so if you don't have all the answers, and you don't, let's just level a playing field there, that like
Sure.
have all the answers. Then what happens is that we spend a lot of emotional energy pretending to have the answers. And there's a
Hmm.
difference between pretending to have the answers and looking for the answers. Pretending is I have to keep up appearances, which can be really exhausting. And I have a lot
Hmm.
of clients talk to me about this, because so much of your energy is now expended trying to maintain what other people think of you,
Hmm.
versus, you know, I'm looking for the answers, I'm doing my best, and I can actually say to my team, I don't always have the answers, and I believe there's wisdom in this room. And let's start asking each other better questions so we can get more wisdom from everybody. So it's not all on me all the time.
Yeah, and you throw out there the whole age, factor, and then also like, throw other things in like gender or, socioeconomic, economic background or things like that. That is other stuff that kind of muddles all of those conversations and where people are coming from. How do you like, do you have a different approach to that? Do you have a different feeling about like how those things affect? Do you see that more or not in other situations? That's a lot of questions there.
Yeah, lot to unpack
How does
there.
that factor in there?
Yeah, so it can, what happens is that we're having this, like, we have more people in across generations in the workforce than we've ever had before, because people are living longer, right? We have
Right.
this, and this is pretty typical across generations and across time, where you have this sort of expansion and contraction. And right now we're in a space of expansion. So you think about our politicians are, in their 80s, right? Some of the
Mhm.
oldest politicians we've ever had. People are waiting longer to retire, part because they have to, and part because they want to keep working, right? We also have heard plenty about, you know, for some people, the moment they retire, it's when they start to fall apart because they
Right.
need to be engaged, right? And so you still have people, the baby boomers who are in, then you have the Gen Xers, which is my generation, which are a much smaller portion of the population. And so there's this, like, what's called the bathtub effect. So there's a ton of baby boomers, and then you imagine it sort of drops down into a U shape, and down at the bottom are the Gen Xers. And they start to come up, and millennials and Gen Zs are much more of them, right?
Mhm.
And there are different values because we have this expansion across generations inside workforces. There's a real um, sort of collision in the attempts to try to bring values together, where baby boomers might see, the need for innovation differently than Gen Zs, and Gen Zs see the need for values. They want to see organizations that are really sustainable, fair and equal and just and diverse, and they should want those things, right? And then there are plenty of baby boomers who want those things too, but there's still, like, the urgency of it across generations is different.
Right. Yeah, no, I can see that. And then when you have all those different personalities in one workspace, that's where, a lot of like, I don't want to say the word conflict, but conflict can end up different perceptions of, there's a gray area. And I think, in our society, you were talking a little bit about this with the politics stuff. I'm not going to get into politics, but like just in general, our society has gone from like, taking that gray area out of account. And it seems like they always want the right or the wrong answer, the black or the white. There isn't that middle ground that I remember from years ago. And are you seeing that in the workplace too? Is it
Yeah.
prevalent?
Yeah, I do actually. I will say that I see it in two different ways. One is it is happening, right? Because we have this sort of fracturing and division and the hardening of opinions and politics and belief structures, which is when you get further away. So I'll just do a brief sort of history, right? That like
Sure.
after World War II, you have, the silent generation and then the baby boomers. And what they had done was they were institution creators because they lived through the war or they were young when the war was happening. And their message, this was true of my grandmother too, was you have to be helpful. That's the
Hmm.
whole message for that generation, be helpful. And so they created institutions like the United Nations, World Health Organization, right? IMF, like all this starts to get created.
Hmm.
Now you get 2, 3 generations away from the people who created that. And those institutions seem like they're falling apart. There's less faith in the institutions. And so people have real disagreement about the validity of the institutions. I mean, we have a real lack of faith in our country. And actually, it's a global thing around institutions, healthcare, politics, right? All across that. So, why did I bring that up? So it's happening inside
Yeah.
organizations. Right? There is some of that where leaders are being asked to do more than ever before. And part of that is to manage lots of different generations inside an organization, lots of different values, and trying to keep themselves from becoming the target of social media while also
Right.
still using social media in a way that benefits the business and the employees. And so much of this is really, I thought this was a beautiful kind of metaphor. As you think about down in South America, where the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean meet down near Antarctica, it is very turbulent there. And
Hmm.
that's because you have two different seas, like oceans coming together. One, they each have their own tides, their own rhythms, their own forces. And so they collide with each other. And right now, that's what we're experiencing is all that turbulence with one older way of doing things with this new way that's trying to emerge. And it's happening inside organizations too. And organizations have an incredible capacity for being part of the transformation into a world that is more sustainable, it is more just, it is more diverse, and it is more equal. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy path to get there, and doesn't mean it's going to be perfect when we get there, right? Like it's not just a utopia, but it is, it's the idea of dedicate your life to problems that you may not be able to solve in your lifetime.
Yeah, that's super interesting and then spot on, I think, so when you have a person coming to you from an organization asking for your help, how do you help them? What's the process? Like, what's the first step?
Yeah, first I want to understand what's happening. If let's say so, like recently, an executive director came and said, "We're looking to do team building." And I said, "Okay, great. Like, tell me a little bit about the makeup of your team. How many people are on it? How many people are new? How many people have been here for a while, right? So how much? So I'm looking for how much institutional knowledge is there for
Sure.
the organization? How much is new and new energy that's happening in there? And then I ask, tell me about some of the challenges that you might be experiencing. And people often tell me about we're remote or we're hybrid, or we have some people on the team who don't quite get along with each other. They give me these parts of the story, right? And what I'm hearing here is that the parts of the system are not connected.
Hmm.
And often that means that people are working, especially remotely, they haven't taken the time to really connect with each other because they often don't know how. And without some facilitation, it can feel awkward to try to generate the sort of conversations that really do connect people. And so, one of the questions that I love to start a team building with for all of the members of the team is, why is it important that you're here today?
Hmm.
It's important for you, for your team, for your organization, for your community, and give people time to reflect on that and then discuss it. Because of that grounding, like that's grounding in a sense of purpose together around why this matters. And often that's something that just gets skipped because we're telling each other what we should be doing rather than why are we here and why does this matter to each of us?
Right. Right. And are you finding that there's an even mix of, are you doing these all like remotely, hybrid, in person? Is there an even mix, like on based upon your professional opinion, and non-certified data results? Like, what are you seeing as a trend here?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of my work has turned virtual since the pandemic, which is great in some ways. And I will tell you that team building, it can happen beautifully online. It does happen beautifully online. And there is just that special element of being in person.
Hmm.
So if when possible, I'm in person. And when it's virtual, I can still help those parts of the system really connect to each other.
So for the virtual stuff or hybrid stuff, do you have like a special programmer you use, or is it all over Zoom? What's kind of the implication of that?
It's Zoom. Yeah,
Okay.
nothing fancy.
How do you get past, like, do you have opportunities where or instances where people are like sort of disengaged, and how do you try to like combat that with the, getting up for coffee or things like that?
So when people are disengaged, often people are disengaged because they're either being talked to or they they haven't been engaged yet in a question that really gets them, that makes them stop and think, right? They feel often what happens is that employees feel forced into going to some kind of event
Hmm.
and like, why am I here? And then if it's just being told what you should do or how you should do it or being lectured and it doesn't provide value and it doesn't give you the why, right? This is part of the brain. It's like, great, we're here. Why are we here?
Hmm.
Why does this matter? And if that's not answered quickly and not just by the facilitator, but by everybody in the room, then it leaves this gap where people like where the connection could really begin right away.
Hmm. Yeah, it goes back to that like kind of two-way communication thing, right? The leader needs to be invested, but also so does the crew, right? And they both have to kind of meet in the middle and have that understanding.
I would say it's even more than two-way, right? So there's like the back and forth thing, but there's also the like, if you think about sort of like the network, like how roots are connected underground, right? One of the things we know is that trees use the root system of mushrooms to communicate with each other. So there's a whole overlapping, connecting happening underground. And when an organization is really humming along, there's that level of communication that's happening. It's not just one direction or two direction, it's multi-directional all the time. And so all this information is moving, right? And so idea with is it Ken Blanchard? It's one of those guys. He said, what is it? Clarity, something like clarity happens at the speed of trust, right? So the faster your trust is, the more information is going to move.
You're connecting with my inner nerd too, with the whole Star Trek spore drive, and everything's connected through space and everything. Yeah.
Right.
But no, I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's communication is much more subtle than that. And then you have like different groups at organizations and how they perceive each other's groups, and people that like sort of, I was like growing up, I was like a clique wanderer. Like one day I'm with the goth kids, one day I'm with the skaters, and then I'm with the drama club, whatever. So like, and it's all like a different dynamic within each group and how those groups interconnect or don't interconnect. So that's a
That's
very
good.
good point.
Yeah, it's a bit of a like chameleon, right? Being able to
Mhm.
sort of shift a bit based on sort of the culture of each subgroup and being able to kind of fit in there. And that can be a real emotional intelligence. There are two parts to
Mhm.
that. I also understand it personally, is that there's the emotional intelligence of being able to read the room really quickly. The challenge that can show up, and I know this personally, is that when we're busy being the chameleon, we may not also be taking the time to know who we are
Mhm.
individually, right? We're sort of so busy adapting to what's around us that we might not be taking time to like get in our bodies, get in our own minds and think about what do I want, who am I, what would really, what do I want to be celebrating in a year? It's more
Yeah.
like you're trying to anticipate what other people want and what they're going to enjoy or want or react to.
And that can be some of the biggest challenges for individuals, is what do I want out of this, work? What do I want to be, when I grow up? And I have like a career support group I work with and network with, helping people with their job transitions and things like that. And a lot of times they're so focused on that, like, I need a job. That's the goal. That's not the goal. You need to know who you are, what you want, And then you can look for that job in that right environment, and like what's good for you and what's a good fit for them kind of thing. Because if you don't know what you want, you're going to get yourself right back into another situation where you're going to be searching again, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. So what happens, and actually I just had a client I'd had a year or two ago, and he had needed some career coaching help. He wanted to make a transition. He wasn't sure what to do. He was like, I don't really like promoting myself. I don't even know how to talk about myself, right, in a way that
Mm,
is, gets people to pay attention. And so we worked on, okay, tell me about your strengths. Tell me about a time, a story when you were really working at your best and you felt most alive at work. And then you start to pull out the pieces like, okay, so you're really good at connecting dots. You're really good at strategy. You're really good at making sure that everybody in the room has what they need to do their work, right? And I think, it's those kinds of things that can be really supportive is understanding who are you,
mhm,
deciding what you want based on as the best picture you can have at the time, right? We all
mhm,
have our limitations, but who are you in this moment? What can you say about, the strengths that you have brought already, to other workplaces? And what work would just bring you alive in the future, right?
yeah,
And thinking about like, are you, because we can really get mismatched, and this is a place where organizations get tripped up all the time, right?
yeah,
You hire somebody who really loves the data, they want to get deep down into it, and they're looking sort of what's the like perfect answer, and you put them in a job where everything is changing around them all the time, and they don't get time to really sink into the data, and they're
yeah,
constantly being distracted, and it is highly stressful for them,
mhm,
right? And the inverses can be true, which is that you have someone who's like super outgoing. They'd be maybe a great salesperson, or they would be great client facing, but you've got them in a back room doing data and they feel like they want to die.
yeah. Yeah, and that comes up a lot, and talking about like being yourself in an interview, being yourself like when you're going and learning about like the different jobs and that you're going for is very important, because you don't want to be someone else, because that's who they're trying to hire, and then you get there and you're not going to be happy, or you might not be happy. So I always tell my network, you really got to be yourself, and you got, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, you need to know yourself, right, in order to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to be very unhappy, or I guess, at least statistically, there's a better chance that you'll be unhappy. So kind of along those same lines you were talking about, I'd love to know what are some, ideal, uh, qualities that you find in great leaders.
Mm, Curiosity, for sure. Curiosity about other people, and not curiosity as a weapon. There's an important distinction there, right? Like if someone is being curious because they're looking for the information to like sort of use as leverage against you at some point, that's not real curiosity, right?
Right.
Real curiosity where they are trying to understand, what do you think about this? Where are you coming from with this? What do you see as possible if we actually implemented whatever this suggestion is you're making for us? And I think that's a baseline thing. And it takes some emotional intelligence to stay curious because,
Hmm.
right, because we all get triggered. And what can happen when some of us get triggered, right, is we go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. And to be able
Hmm.
to come back out of that and then be really curious, it takes internal work to do that. And I find that that's a really key one. The other one about great leaders, and actually the Google did this big study, I think they called it Aristotle, and they were studying their teams, and they found the teams that performed best had leaders who were essentially asking and like who were paying attention
Hmm.
emotionally to what was happening in the room, and they were willing to speak to it. Like, hey, I noticed you just crossed your arms, or I noticed that you seem to be, you know, um, kind of checked out right now. What's going on? Not with a bunch of judgment and you shouldn't be feeling this way, but more like just making an observation. Because when you do that, you're now elevating the emotional intelligence in the room, and you're giving permission to having those conversations about what you're feeling.
Yeah. No, that's so important. And even like when, I work in data science, and I work with a lot of really smart individuals that are used to having the answers and all those other things. And so students are emulating that behavior. And what I found is like, I'm not afraid to ask, like, what are you talking about? Because I don't necessarily know. And it takes them back to like, explain some of the basic principles and stuff like that. And I've noticed some of the students go, oh, I didn't realize that, or something, when we're meeting about something. So I think that that's also something else in line with what you're saying, that's important. Like that when you have a leader that's willing to kind of say, yeah, you just crossed your arms, or why are you doing it that way?
Yeah.
Um, you know, there's a vulnerability there, right? And you need to put yourself out there, but then it also shows and emulates that behavior that's okay. And we're going like from it's funny how the world seems to like kind of go in circles on certain things, and the emotional intelligence thing is still a really hot ticket item. And in general, hopefully I don't get in trouble for this, but women are usually more attached, or in line with their emotions, emotionally intelligent than men in general. And I think and I've noticed that like for years we've been like, business is business and you need to make unemotional decisions. So like we almost were teaching everyone not to be emotional, and now we're going back to that because it's important. I'd love to hear kind of your opinion on that kind of aspect too.
So there are kind of two things that bubble up for me when I hear you say this. One is that studies have been done with boys when they're young, so 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And what happens is those boys, when they have close friendships with other boys, they will share all the same details that girls share with each other, right?
Mhm,
They might race cars and crash things and all that too, but they will treat each other like confidants. They will share all of their deep inside stuff as much as they can, right? At that age with the
mhm,
vocabulary that they have. And it's when they start getting to like 12, 13, 14 that the messages about what it means to be a man in the world start to intrude. And they
mhm,
say you're not supposed to want to have conversational intimacy with another boy. You're not supposed to want to hold hands with another boy, or hold,
mhm,
like hug each other, right? And so we have these rules that start to impose themselves on boys. And right around that time is when the suicidal ideation and sometimes suicidal rate for boys really shoots up
mhm,
drastically, much more so than girls. I mean, right now, I think in America, we have, it's the 3 out of 4 deaths of despair are men killing themselves.
mhm,
And so much of that is loneliness, it's isolation, it's not knowing how to even articulate what they feel, because for so long they were required to keep it to yourself. Don't be a
yeah,
girl, don't be a pussy, don't be all that, right? Like, so keep it to yourself. And when you keep something to yourself all the time, what happens is that the ability to have language for what you feel gets suppressed, and it becomes even harder to summon the language to describe what you.
mhm,
And when you can describe what you feel, you can actually, it can create a somewhat of a liberation internally, because now you can, when you can talk about it, it means you're able to think about it.
mhm.
But if you don't even know how to think about it and you can't talk about it, it's a trap. It's like a prison, right? And so for me, I think there's this idea that women are more emotionally intelligent naturally. And I think it has so much to do with conditioning.
Right. No, I can see that. And it kind of goes back to what you're talking about, like how communication isn't just like I even said I don't like how we're, everything has to be black and white. And I kind of just did it like with the it's two-way communication. No, there's much more subtle things that are happening there. And we sort of like force, our young boys to kind of get away from that and make it more, transactional, right?
Right?
So
Right. Yeah. I
very
mean,
interesting.
it's one of the things that we did early on with our son. So our son is 7 now. And when he was, I don't know, 3 or 4, we got this big chart that has all these icons. So they're just like cartoon pictures of kids. And under each one, so like one has a sad face, one has a happy face, and there are a bunch of them. So there's all
Mhm.
kinds of emotions that are listed: happy, sad, tired, hungry, annoyed, right, uncertain.
Yeah.
And so what we would say to our son once he was starting to get upset was, okay, let's go point to your feelings.
Mhm.
Point to what you feel and say the words, right? And so he would. And I mean, every time it would just bring it down a notch where he'd go from like level 10 to like level 7, 6, right? Just being
Mhm.
able to name it has so much power. I mean, and this is shown in the research too,
Yeah.
that being able to name your feelings is a really big step in being able to essentially shift your feelings, in a direction that you want.
Yeah. No, you're making me smile because it just thought of a memory of one of my kids where it was something, it was like a cartoon, but it wasn't exactly what you were saying. And it was a very simplistic picture. Okay. And when we pointed it to out to him, we're like, what's going on in this picture? And we're thinking, oh, like, the boy is happy. No,
Mhm.
he came up with this huge backstory about why this boy is smiling, and there's like this whole story. And it was just like my wife and I are looking at each other like, what just happened here? And that's kind of the way that he's been throughout his like life. It's just this whole like everything's got a big background story. So I think that's a really cool tool to use for children. Like, I love that idea. I wish I had known that sooner. I probably would have used something more like that, but it just made me think of that moment. Because kids can like, kids can say the darndest things, and they have this subtlety that you don't even realize, right? They have so much in there.
That's right.
So,
I gave a TEDx talk. It's been some years now, about masculinity. And because what was interesting is that growing up, I mean, I grew up in a house where my mother was very codependent. My dad was an alcoholic. There was abuse in the house. And for me, it early on, the way that translated was seeing this the gender divide. I
mhm,
saw it really through the lens of like women being weaker and men being stronger, and my needing to like pretend more like I was a guy, or have some of the male sort of typical attributes to be
mhm.
able to survive and feel like I could make my way through the world. And when I was in the military, it was even more so, right?
Yeah.
Like being in the army, being enlisted in the army, there was plenty of like jokes about women. You can't trust women, right? There,
Mhm.
all that kind of thing that was going on. And for me, I'd often like I came to a point where I started flipping more into being a feminist, and I still believe like we're working towards equal rights, and we will be working on them for more
Yeah.
generations. Right? But for me, what happened is that when I had always imagined myself having a girl my whole
Mhm.
life, and then of course, as fate would have it, we go to the doctor and they're like, "Oh, you're having a boy," and it was oh. And I started to think about men differently because now I was bringing a boy into the world. And I
Yeah.
started to think, oh, wait a minute. I've often thought about this as something being done to women. And there are definitely aspects of that, right?
Right.
I hadn't really considered what's going on with men in this world, right? What are the messages that they're getting? And what needs to shift so that men aren't killing themselves in higher numbers, right? And
Yeah.
what needs to happen so that boys, when they're 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, can hang on to those relationships with other boys that are intimate and fun and confiding, and they don't have to feel like they lock themselves away to fit in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, all these things you're saying, things from my childhood are kind of coming back because I was sort of on the other side. I was always identifying, and connecting well with women. And growing up in describing my feelings and having best friends that were girls. And then I remember a distinct moment, like it was like right when I was going into college. Like I had some guy friends, but not really, really close guy friends. And then I was in the middle of this completely different group. I got invited to go into like a wrestling night or something at a friend's house. And I was just like, they're like, they're farting in the background. They're doing all these things. I'm like, what is going I was totally out of my element because I'm like, this is not what I'm used to. I'm like,
Right.
gross. And it's just so funny to hear like you're talking about you're growing up and being more masculine and stuff like that and going into the army and all that, and I'm like, that's just the opposite. And then I had two girls, with my wife. We had two young ladies, and she's like, let's have a third. And I'm like, oh, okay. I came from a family of three boys, and she came from a family of three girls, and we had twins, and they were both boys. And I'm
Oh.
like, I was fine with girls. Boys are like all over the place. And now there's two of them, and they're both going in opposite directions.
Surprise.
So, right. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit about development, and the younger ages too, because I think that all is related to like the work that you're doing now. We're all raised a little bit differently. We come from different backgrounds. And I do want to kind of get back into like, the work that you do, because we took a really nice like roundabout way. And I love this discussion. It could be a whole nother podcast episode. But I do want to kind of highlight some more of the stuff that you're doing with these companies, and how you're, coaching and your company assists people in getting on the right track and performing as a more cohesive unit. So I think we kind of left it off as like, you have someone reach out to you, you talk about like, the evaluation part of it, like to get an understanding of the environment. Then what's sort of the next step for your, your class or interaction with this company?
So it really depends on what the need is, the size of the team, right? Because I've done work with a 300-person team or
Right.
300-person company where we were working to solve problems that have been longstanding across the entire organization, and silos. Like people talk about
Yeah.
communication silos where you're not getting people to talk to each other. And that usually manifests like, it sounds like a manager saying, I keep calling this department and nobody ever calls me back. I think they just don't care about doing their job.
Hmm.
Well, actually, that tells me that again, the parts in the system need to be connected because they're disconnected. And so that was a big piece of what we did with that project, is really getting people, and it started at the manager level, bringing people together, talking about their ideas for how some of these problems could get solved. And it really helped reshape the organization.
Hmm.
Um, so, but here's the foundation that I always come from. And I've long believed in the power of asking different questions and the idea that we live into our questions.
Hmm.
But one of my mentors, his name is John Berghoff, and he founded Exchange. And he says that your future starts to shift before the answer to your question even arrives.
Hmm.
You start to ask a new question. And because you've now asked a new question, the way that you look at the world has shifted, and you may not even have the answer yet, but now your future is starting to shift, maybe 2 degrees, maybe 10 degrees, because you're moving your mind, your energy in a new direction. And I think that's the baseline for organizations. It's like, I think, what questions are they asking themselves right now about
Hmm.
who they are and what they want? And often you find that they're not asking those sorts of questions about that are generative, about
Hmm.
what we want to be celebrating in a year as a team, as an organization. Instead, we're just asking like, how can we go from broken to fixed? They're not
Hmm.
going
There's a
broken,
process.
right? Instead of going from broken to excellence,
Hmm.
very different thing, right? We treat the notion of the opposite of broken is fixed, and it's not, it's excellence. It's a whole different experience. And coming from that kind of mentality is what helps shift cultures inside organizations.
Yeah. Letting people know that change can happen, and that they can be a component of that change, um, and empowering them. Like a lot of it is empowerment. And I love that quote. That was great. um, but yeah, I think that another thing that I've noticed, we've all been in those situations where you like you said, like you call somebody up and they don't call you back, oh, they must not care. And
Yeah.
and how many things have been completely blown out of proportion because of one misunderstanding, one communication error. What that guy was away for a week but didn't turn his auto office on. We didn't know that, and he must hate me. um
Well, we
so
make all these assumptions, right, that are
right,
don't come from a positive bias. They come from a negative bias.
right.
And from a negative bias, what we're saying is other people don't care. They don't care about their jobs. Why can't you get anybody to ever come to work? Why is it so hard? Right. And that's putting you in a negative mentality and staying there.
Hmm.
And when you do that, it means that what you're not seeing or what's possible.
Hmm.
In some ways, it's like, what needs to die? what belief system are you holding on to that needs to be let go of so that whatever is new can be born and emerge into your life and into your team and into your company?
Yeah. Yeah, and then it kind of also leads into that old adage of like, this is how we do things here, and this is how we've been doing it for years, and it's worked out great. Well, society changes over time, environments change over time, people change over time. And sometimes some of those best, I was just having this conversation with someone else. Sometimes those really awesome products or services that your company has was really great in 1964, but completely irrelevant now, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you're seeing your sales go down and you're firing the salesman because they're not reaching quota, but it's not the salesman. It's the way you're approaching that product or service needs to change. You need to be constantly evaluating not only your products, but your people, and reevaluating how they do their work and being willing to change. And it sounds like, that's a lot of what you're opening people up to see is they
Yeah.
need to be evaluating and reevaluating, even if it is something that is successful.
Well, part of what this is Eric Teller is the director of Google X, and Google X does incredibly innovative things, right? And Eric Teller made this very simple graph that showed that the pace of change is like a hockey stick. It's going up, but
Hmm.
that our ability as humans to keep up is not keeping up. We're
Yeah,
actually kind of doing this. There may be even signs that our ability
going
to adapt
down.
is declining, right? But the point that he made, which is a really important one, is that when you're in an environment like this, where it's constantly changing, and sometimes you're dealing with complex problems, not complicated problems, which means you cannot always just set a goal. You have to, at best, set a direction because there are too many factors that are unknown, too
Hmm.
many variables, right? And so what he says is that it's really important to be a lifelong learner. And if you're a
Hmm.
lifelong learner, that means you're always asking questions. You're not getting stuck in the, well, that's just how we've always done it. Well, great, but like, is is that going to work in 10 years?
Hmm.
Is it going to work in 20 years? And is it going to work for the employees who are coming in who have innovative ideas and and want to contribute to your organization? Because if you get stuck at that level of this is just how we do it, and you have a whole influx of people who come in and you won't let them innovate and contribute, you're going to lose them. Because
Yeah.
eventually what's going to happen is what will happen is you'll lose some of them, and the ones who stay will quit. They'll
Hmm.
stay, but quit.
Yeah, and what you just said kind of leads into another question is how do you sort of finish out the program and find it successful and evaluate it, but then how do you help them continue on? Because I'm sure they'd love to keep you on as a consultant or as a coach forever, but at some point you got to let them kind of take over the reins. And how do you help them to be successful in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So like there's always a debrief call at the end to really talk about like next steps, recommendations, what you might want to be considering as a result of our work together. So that's part of it. And the idea is that like, I don't want you to be dependent on me for the
Hmm.
rest of your life, right? I want you to
Yeah.
be able to like generate those questions for yourselves, and I'm
Hmm.
happy to like come back in, right? So I've done some team building. Now we're going to be working in strategic planning, or we need to be doing an offsite, right? So there's still ways to stay engaged, but it doesn't mean that like every day you're now dependent on an outside expert for your answers.
Hmm. That's great. It's terrific. Ariane, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you definitely want to like, bring up or hammer home about like the things that you do or the people you work with?
Mm.
I give you the stumper question.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at your tagline about that sounds terrific
Hmm.
and thinking about the things that are terrific right now because there are, we live in an era of some very bad news, right?
Hmm.
And I want to hammer, maybe I'm not a hammer is maybe a little bit too hard a word for this, but I'll say that in 2020, I was really struggling with what was happening environmentally. And
Right.
to be clear, I still don't feel awesome about it. But in 2020, I was talking to my aunt, who is like a spiritual mentor for me. And she said, look, connect with people who are working on things that you care about, people who
Mm.
are working on the environment. And she said, and even if you're not going to connect to them physically, connect in your heart to the people around the world who are making a difference. And I
Hmm.
thought some of the best advice, and I started doing it. And not only did I connect in my heart, I started meeting a lot of people who were doing it. I found that I became almost a magnet for the good news of what's
Hmm.
happening. And it gave me so much hope and optimism, and not just like, you know, false positivity, but real grounded optimism, because I can see the innovations that are happening, that are coming, you know, and we need
Hmm.
to happen faster. That is for sure true. But there's something about that. Just connect in your heart first. And
Hmm.
the idea that you have potentially millions of people around the world who care about the things that you care about.
Yeah. No, for sure. And environment and sustainability is really, really important things. And I feel like, I have a number of people that I've worked with in the past, and then friends that are very passionate about environment and very passionate about, like, leaving the earth in a better place. And sometimes they're so much energy in fighting for those things that they kind of lose themselves in it a little bit. And, you know, um, I've seen a lot of things that where people may have been able to meet in the middle, and then instead of meeting in the middle, they've actually split apart, and neither side got anything out of it they wanted it. Um, so and that kind of happens with environmental issues or politics and things like that. We fight so hard, and we don't take the time to really listen. And kind of going back to what we were talking about before, like really listen to all the different lines of communication and to understand. And I think I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about your work in sustainability and how that kind of empowers, the individuals you're working with or companies you're working with to do good work to help the earth and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I I was not focused on sustainability, environmental sustainability until 2020. I almost said 2022.
Hmm. Yeah.
2020, because I was, there were all these fires happening in California, and I was watching my family in California have to leave their homes to
Yeah.
escape. And I'm being over here feeling really helpless about it. And I was like, you often don't care about something until it becomes personal to you.
Right.
And it started to become personal to me, and also thinking about my son's future, like, what does it mean to like run out of water
Hmm.
when, when he's 17, 27, 37, whatever, right? Like, what's my role? And I think part of why it's easy to sort of disconnect from it, or to um, be tempted to not pay that much attention, is because I think one of the first things that happens is when you really pay attention, the
Hmm.
question that comes up is, what's my responsibility here? And
Hmm.
the problem that a lot of organizations are having is that there are the leaders might be on board with sustainability because they understand that, like, from a competitive advantage perspective, that's good. From a retention and attraction of employees, that's a really good thing, right? And they may also just believe that on a moral level, it's an important thing. And then you get down to the middle level of the organization, the managers who have to implement changes, and they go, but I've also got all of this stuff already going on, and now you want me to make these changes? You want me to do this reporting? Like, no,
Yeah.
I don't have time. It's a disincentive to them, which
Right.
means that leadership needs to be thinking creatively about how to incentivize the middle part of their organization to making those changes that are so key to drawing down our carbon emissions and our waste and our water usage.
Hmm. Yeah. No, it's an interesting challenge, and I was thinking about some, like, how do you get people that aren't exposed or aren't emotionally attached to these situations to understand. And you think about some of the, like, the scared straight programs, as far as, like, misguided youth, and you bring them to a jail, and you can't do that for everyone. And studies have shown that that's not super effective, in getting youth to change and understand, um the path that they're on or may not be on.
Right.
So Yeah, I mean, I really applaud the work that you do. I could talk to you forever. I really
Likewise.
could. And we went in some really great directions. And I urge my audience, well, we will put all of your, contact information in the show notes, but I really urge them to reach out to you and connect with Ariana because she can help you personally, she can help your organization, and she can help make the world a better place, which is a lot to say about one guest on one show. So thank you so much for being on That Sounds Terrific. You are an absolute terrific a part of my network, and I love it.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. It's been such a delight.
Thank you for joining us in another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Don't forget to check out the show notes and our website at thatsoundsterrific.com to find the contact information and the best ways to volunteer with the organizations that we feature. If you know someone that is doing terrific things and think they should be featured in a future episode, be sure to email us their name, contact info, and short description of what they're doing at thatsoundsterrific@gmail.com. If you like our show, give us a 5-star rating and give us some social media love by liking our Facebook page, That Sounds Terrific. Follow us on Twitter at Sounds Terrific 2 and Instagram at Sounds Terrific. We love hearing your feedback on how to make our show sound even more terrific. Till next time.